Welcome to another edition of Phoenix Talkback, and I am the Lonely Bull. Welcome to Phoenix Talkback, and this is our last show. Since our last show, three things very notable have occurred, two with the Supreme Court of the United States and one in the United States Senate. First, the Supreme Court of the United States pretty much gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, and there's been a lot of pushback on that. The second thing that has happened is that they also, thankfully, gutted the Defense of Marriage Act and Proposition 8 in California. And, Mike Huckabee tweeted about that. He tweeted, "My thoughts on the ruling are that Jesus wept." And Jesus H. Christ then saw that and responded to Mike Huckabee and said, "Those were tears of joy, you nitwit." Oh, man. Thank you. Another tweet I read was, "As we celebrate today, let's spare a warm thought for our opponents who have lost absolutely nothing." But in gutting Article 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Supreme Court basically determined that there is no more racism. Another tweet I found was this guy who wrote, "Geez, the Supreme Court of the United States says racism is over. I can't decide if I want to celebrate by watching the Trayvon Martin trial or buying the new Paula Deen cookbook." At any rate, in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court's 5 conservative judges ruled Tuesday that the formula which required states with a history of racial discrimination to pre-clear changes to their voting laws with the Department of Justice or a federal judge before enforcing them was unconstitutional. And I'll tell you, within hours of this ruling, 6 out of the 9 states that are listed in the parameters of Article 5, they moved to restrict voting by putting up a stricter voter ID law requirement of a photo ID, and also Texas put forth their redistricting plan. But this also includes Mississippi, Alabama, who brought the action originally, Arkansas, South Carolina, and Virginia. Now, Arizona's ID law was struck down, but there's nothing to stop Arizona from trying again. What I'd like you to hear is Michael Papantonio and Sam Seder talk about this Supreme Court action of gutting Article 5 of the Voting Rights Act. They come to a very revealing conclusion at the end of this.
The Supreme Court has essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act, or at least the Section 5 provision, which has called for preclearance for about nearly a dozen states and counties across the country because of their history of essentially disenfranchising minority voters. The Supreme Court has said that while we find the idea of preclearance not to be unconstitutional, we have deemed that the methodology in which Congress has chosen to use, and remember, this is something that was reauthorized just about 7 years ago,
right,
that the methodology that Congress has decided to use, we have decided that there's not enough racism, essentially, to justify this methodology.
There are states in this country like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Texas, Florida. The history of racism is so deplorable. The stories of lynchings, of murders at all levels, efforts to purge voters, efforts to keep people away from the polls. It's been so clear since in the 60s all the way up to today in those states that we have to have a special review anytime those states come forward and they want to put a change to process of voting. The U.S. Justice Department gets the right to say, no, you can't do it without our approval. Now, they just gutted that, and they set us back decades.
And what really is stunning about this, Pap, is that we don't hear this thrown around by the right anymore, because now that they control the court, it's no longer operative. But for many years, and they used to complain about the concept of judicial activism.
That's right. No one can convince me that this Supreme Court is anything but an activist court. While the right wing has complained about district courts being activist courts, well, I think the shoe's on the other foot now. And this is very disappointing. I also am steadfast in my belief no one can convince me that there is not racism in this country, and worse as it's ever been, as evidenced by, say, Paula Deen, as evidenced by, say, the murder trial of George Zimmerman, allegedly murdering Trayvon Martin. There's all sorts of other examples of racism. It does exist. And it also intrudes on other things that we want to do. You know, this program has been very interested in comprehensive immigration reform. This past week, the U.S. Senate passed the Gang of Eight's plan. It's an amended plan. It's actually more so resembles, instead of comprehensive immigration reform, it more so resembles comprehensive immigration enforcement. Yeah, they're going to stick a lot of money down at the border. They're going to militarize the border, and I think this sends a wrong message. Alfredo Gutierrez, a former gubernatorial candidate here in Arizona and Democratic lawmaker, who recently came out with a book called To Sin Against Hope, has written this about comprehensive immigration reform, the bill that left the Senate. He writes, "The immigration bill is indeed causing great controversy in the Latino community. I believe the Senate, led by Schumer, engineered the weakest, most far-right possible bill to obtain a few Republican votes. Claim bipartisanship and send it over to the House, where it'll certainly be amended further and further to the right. In the end, it probably won't survive the House, but if it does, after being amended even further to the right, Latinos will probably oppose it. The Democrats will loudly blame the GOP and try to whip Latinos into an anti-Republican electoral frenzy the next time that there is an election." Well, what should have happened? What should have happened was a strong bill that respected immigrant dignity and did not further militarize the border or augment the machinery of deportation and incarceration. The bill does have its winners, though. The Dream students get a direct and unhampered route to legalization and ultimately citizenship. Agricultural workers get more difficult time, but still a reasonable route to citizenship. That leaves about 9 million folks. The biggest and most persistent lie is that all estimated 11 million people will get a pathway to citizenship. And he's right. It's not going to be for everybody. But on the other hand, many people claim that this is better than nothing. Well, I'd like you to hear Jose Penelosa, who was on this show, talk specifically about the timeline.
The way that comprehensive immigration reform is set out is that right now, according to the Gang of Eight plan, folks have to wait 13 years to become a legal permanent resident. And then after that, then they have to wait 5 years to become a naturalized U.S. citizen. So we're talking 18 to 20 years to actually somebody can vote in an election. Many things can happen during that particular time period. A lot of those folks might not even be able to speak English at that time. A lot of them might already be deceased. A lot of folks might have maybe gotten problems with the law. So to believe that everyone's going to become 1 million folks or 100% of 1 million is going to become a U.S. citizen is incorrect. In Arizona today, we have over 500,000 legal permanent residents that have not applied to become U.S. citizens from all countries around the world.
I'd like to remind you the way that the comprehensive immigration reform has been written by the Gang of Eight is that this path to citizenship would not start, the clock would not start until the border is secure. Or am I wrong about that?
There's an initial 6-month border plan, and that has to be established, and then before application period is open. And then you are correct, there are biometrics that the border has to be, according, I believe, 90% secure in order for folks to become legal permanent residents.
Now, if that wasn't bad enough, the fact that the clock won't start until the border is 90% secure, we're still battling a lot of ignorance in the community. A lot of ignorance in the community. And I'm going to play for you a primary example that happened on the show. There was this guy who called up, and his name was Guy. This was as we were talking about Jason Richwine's dissertation alleged that Latinos were genetically inferior. Well, you know, not only are we trying to get a law passed that'll protect people's rights and solve problems, on the way towards that, we're having to deal with this kind of idiocy. Here's something else that happened this last week is Jason Richwine, a PhD from Harvard in 2009. He quit the Heritage Foundation because it was uncovered that his dissertation, IQ and Immigration Policy, proposed the idea that Latinos have a lower IQ genetically. And I've never heard of anything so outlandish and ridiculous in my entire life. Have you?
I've never heard such thing. In fact, he was quoted as saying, "No one knows whether Hispanics will ever reach IQ parity with whites, but the prediction that new Hispanic immigrants will have low IQ children and grandchildren is difficult to argue against." Well, I deal with dreamers all the time, and let me tell you, these are some of the smartest individuals I come across.
Yeah.
In fact, they have a robotics team here locally that's won all kinds of competitions that's composed of dreamers. So to say something is ridiculous as well because they're Hispanic, they have a low IQ, I just can't understand the logic behind that.
Okay, well... Oh, I wonder who that is. Hello, who's there?
Hi, this is Guy in Phoenix.
Hey, Guy, what do you say?
I'm calling to challenge multiple statements you've been making. Of course, those are a reflection of your belief system, your attitude about things. And
Well, I'd like to hear your attitude. Go right ahead, Guy.
well, it's interesting to hear how you're characterizing some people and how they see things, but you see yourselves as all good to go.
Guy, I'd like you to get right to the point. What are you contesting?
First of all, the point about immigration and the person you said who resigned from the Heritage Foundation.
Yes, Jason Richwine, who believes that Latinos are just naturally, genetically inferior in intelligence.
And where are you seeing him say that? I was under the impression that his dissertation was basically empirical research comparing IQs of native-born American population with that of immigrant groups. And the Hispanic population was also broken out. And he just explored the causes of an immigrant IQ deficit that appears to persist among Hispanic immigrants to the U.S. through several generations.
And why do you think he recently resigned after it was revealed that this dissertation was in existence? And Heritage Foundation is trying to distance themselves from this Jason Richwine.
I think that's a mischaracterization.
I'd like to repeat the quote for you from the Washington Post. It says, "No one knows whether Hispanics will ever reach IQ parity with whites, but the prediction that new Hispanic immigrants will have low IQ children and grandchildren is difficult to argue against."
Well, it says the thesis analyzes social policy consequences of these findings and uses a model of the labor market to show how immigrant IQ affects the economic surplus accruing to natives and the wage impact on low-skill natives.
I'd like to remind you the same
And if you see
attitude.
who was on his dissertation committee...
I can care less who is on his dissertation committee. I can care less. The same attitude was also in existence towards the Emancipation Proclamation, because there were a number of people in this country who believed that African Americans or black
Why
people...
are you taking someone who's just making a basic statement, giving it an academic study, and taking it and making it into something else? I mean, why are you even going into the Emancipation Proclamation and slavery and all that?
History repeats itself if we do not study, if we do not talk about it.
Actually, there's another thing I'd like to point out from that article. His exact wording is, "The average IQ of immigrants in the United States is substantially lower than that of the white native population."
And therefore what?
The white native population. I didn't know there was a white native population.
I mean, so what?
Why is he
We're born.
comparing only white natives? There's a lot of natives from a bunch of different ethnicities that are born here, so why separate that way if you're talking about immigrants versus the average American? Why not compare Hispanics in the United States to Hispanics coming from other places, or Africans coming from Africa and African Americans? Why say I'm comparing you to, basically, the exact wording is white native population?
But anyway, let's move on to another topic. It's the people who get here illegally are the ones breaking the system. And why are these proud Hispanics moving to the United States and trying to change the United States and its Constitution and its laws?
This country didn't used to have all these immigration laws. They've been added over time because certain subsections of the population were targeted. For example, Asians who weren't allowed to own land because we were afraid of them coming over here. And a lot of people were afraid they were going to take over. So people talk about the history of immigration. They don't talk about how the only original law there used to be is that you can't be a prostitute and you can't be a felon. And we just went from there and we kept adding.
Why are these people trying to transform the laws of the United States into something else?
Who are these people? You talk about us generalizing people. Who are these people?
I'm just saying.
I'm a proud Hispanic, and I'm not advocating for that.
There's a double standard here that these proud Hispanics, instead of getting their own nation's act together in Mexico, they're trying to.
Why just Mexico? We come from all over the place. Immigrants come from all over.
States, and it's a downgrading. Also, this thing about marriage equality, marriage is only the union of one man and one woman.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Guy, for calling in. All right. Thank you so much for calling in. No, I'm sorry. Guy, I'll tell you that if you have a specific point of view and you want to talk about it, I would invite you to create your own radio show, and you can talk about exclusions and keeping to how things used to be, the type of America that you are used to, when the Constitution is a living document and times change. And you cannot say, why don't you people go back to where you came from? Because we're a country of immigrants, and we come from all over. I don't believe the kind of idiocy in this guy. Guy, are you listening? Guy, are you listening? Well, why do you think this matters? It's because Jason Richwine and the Heritage Foundation were so close for so long. And what kind of impression do you think the Heritage Foundation has on politics? Convinced you, Guy. Convinced you. And I think my point about, 100 years ago or so, the misconceptions we had about African Americans, about black people in this country, did exist, where many people who were in favor of slavery, they believed that black people were inferior. You know, what's with this inferior, superior business? So, while we're trying to fix problems in this country and find a consensus and a path to citizenship, on this program, I've had Cesar Valdez. He's a dreamer. He takes a lot of risk in showing up on a program because he's an undocumented person. And he had a few things to say about immigration reform from the perspective of being a dreamer. I had him on with Viva Samuel Ramirez, who is an American citizen, and we asked him from his perspective what he thought of this immigration plan. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Let's have immigration reform, but let's not give out our pound of flesh any more than we need to. Here's Cesar on Phoenix Talkback. And at the end of this little segment, we hear a portion of a poem that he wrote. You know who Rudy Acuna is? He's the father of Chicano studies. He recently wrote a blog, and he titled it, "Since When Is Losing Winning?" In this blog he wrote, he thinks that the Gang of Eight plan has no quick and just pathway to citizenship, and that it has a jingoist and racist border security policy and a neo-bracero program. And he believes that this current immigration bill is too important for us to settle for half a loaf of bread.
And this is the question I want to ask to a dreamer himself. There is this debate going on. Some of us say, we should hold out for what we asked for, right? But in the end of the day, I'm not going to be deported. I'm not in danger of being deported. I want to know from dreamers, what do dreamers want? What will you accept? Will you accept a half a loaf of bread? Will you be insulted by this offer from the Gang of Eight? Do you see a hope in the future? I think it's important for you to share with the public how we are going to guide this battle as we go on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not going to accept anything that's watered down, anything that is the quality that we want. And I think the biggest struggle as of now in this year has been just kind of a damage control, because, it was the gun debate that we're saying, gun debate is going to take priority over immigration. Boston bombings, a lot of people started some negative talk and negative rhetoric around that. And keeping in mind that it's not the end of the battle. We're still going to push for wherever we see, whatever we want, we'll still push for it. And I look forward to seeing the first dreamer that becomes a senator, the first dreamer that runs for Congress.
See, Lou, do any of those things frighten you, what he just mentioned?
No, not at all.
Neither do I. We are neighbors here. Lou and I are neighbors in the United States, and what is good for me is good for him.
Dignity. You won't find my dignity on any social security card, passport, or license. Dignity is what gives me the courage to say in the face of the biggest bigot that I'm fighting for nothing short of full, equal human rights. The same rights that people take for granted every single day. Does my existence offend or threaten you? We are Latino rebels challenging the status quo, having the audacity to force change in this country. I refuse to stay home, to stay asleep, refuse to stay silent, to play by the rules. We will confront unjust laws unapologetically. We will break the fear in Chicago, Atlanta, New York, Florida, California, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, New Mexico, and all across this country. Things don't get better, we grow stronger. Passion, we got it. Talent, we overflow in it. Our people do not quit. Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, Malcolm X, Dr. King, the Chicano movement, the farmer workers movement, the Dream Act movement.
Thank you, Cesar Valdez. So, to lodge me out of this position I'm in between a rock and a hard place, where we need comprehensive immigration reform, yet what's coming down the pike now to the House, to the Gang of Seven, is something that is so militarized that it resembles enforcement instead of reform. Well, let's take a tip from what happened with the Supreme Court striking down the Defense of Marriage Act. Is a lot of the same senators who came out to applaud the Supreme Court striking down the Defense of Marriage Act and Proposition 8, a lot of those senators did sign on for the Defense of Marriage Act. And so I have hope and faith, like what Cesar mentioned, is that let's pass this immigration bill. And in subsequent years, we can possibly repair it, because even before it passes and gets to Obama's desk, which I do hope it does, we can see that it needs a lot of repair. Coming up in the next half hour will be some more highlights from Phoenix Talkback show. So please stay tuned to Phoenix Talkback. A&B Automotive is your local auto care center, trusted with your vehicle since 1995. They are your local service center for light trucks, domestic, and foreign vehicles. Their experience ensures that your vehicle is well maintained all year round. It's the small repairs that prevent costly breakdowns, and you can trust A&B Automotive ASE certified expertise in everything from oil changes, tune-ups and brakes, to drivetrain and engine repairs. It's what they do to make your vehicle reliable when you need it most. Go see A&B Automotive at 1235 East Dunlap in Phoenix, Arizona, or call them at 602-906-9579. Se habla español. They're also on the web at abautomotiveaz.com. That's A&B Automotive, 1235 East Dunlap in Phoenix. 602-906-9579.
Radio. Why should I advertise on radio? There's nothing to look at, no pictures.
Listen, you can do things on radio you couldn't possibly do on TV.
That'll be the day.
All right, watch this. Okay, people, and now when I give you the cue, I want the 700-foot mountain of whipped cream to roll into Lake Michigan, which has been drained and filled with hot chocolate. Then the Royal Canadian Air Force will fly overhead towing a 10-ton maraschino cherry, which will be dropped into the whipped cream to the cheering of 25,000 extras. All right, cue the mountain. Cue the Air Force. Cue the maraschino cherry. Okay, 25,000 cheering extras. Now, you want to try that on television?
Well...
You see, radio is a very special medium because it stretches the imagination.
Doesn't television stretch the imagination?
Up to 27 inches, yes.
Are you lonely? Are you looking to make a connection? Do you want to listen in on the naughtiest ingoing and outgoing conversations? Then join the NSA. Getting a job with the NSA is the quickest way to peep in on private phone calls, emails, texts, and fun Skype sessions from all around the country. Becoming a contractor for the NSA gives you unlimited access to any private contact made over AT&T and Verizon. With our exclusive search engine, PrismTube, you'll have access to every private photo and video sent over Yahoo, Hotmail, Google, Facebook, Apple, AOL, YouTube, Dropbox, and Paltalk. Because NSA stands for no strings attached. So what are you waiting for? Dial 1-800 and any phone number and apply to the NSA today. Come on, I'm lonely.
Is this your car? Or is this your car? The ASE certified mechanics at A&B Automotive have the expertise to make your car sound like this. You can rely on A&B Automotive to keep you safe on the road. Go see them at 1235 East Dunlap in Phoenix, Arizona, or call them at 602-906-9579. Se habla español. They're also on the web at abautomotiveaz.com. A&B Automotive, 1235 East Dunlap in Phoenix, 602-906-9579. Because you don't want your car to sound like this. You want it to sound like this. A&B Automotive, 602-906-9579. Tell them Phoenix Talkback sent you.
Welcome back to Phoenix Talkback, the world's first Jewish-Chicano radio show. You know, about a month ago, we had a mystery guest in the studio. Why was this person known as a mystery guest? Because it happened so quickly in the morning. Yes, Arizona Legislature's Senate Minority Leader Steve Gallardo was on the show. He came on the show to talk about Tom Horn, to talk about why Jan Brewer has denied driver's licenses to the DACA applicants. But what he said about Tom Horn was very telling. Here's an attorney general who thinks nothing of breaking the law. He should be held to the same standard. And essentially, Steve Gallardo was calling for the impeachment of Tom Horn, and we agreed. Okay, we've got our mystery guest in the studio. And want to guess who it is, anybody? It is Arizona Senator Steve Gallardo of the current Arizona legislature. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Honorable State Senator Steve Gallardo. This past week, our illustrious Attorney General, Tom Horn, is our state's top law enforcement officer. Got a traffic ticket while being under the watchful eye of the FBI, who were looking for him with regards to campaign violations. After he pled no contest and paid his fine, you called for his impeachment.
Yes, we got to look at what Tom Horn has done to the Attorney General's office. He has turned that office upside down. He will go down as probably the worst Attorney General this state has ever had. We add on top of that a campaign finance violation from the previous election. $500,000 he used illegally to actually win the office. $500,000 for him to be successful for that Attorney General's race. He has been caught. They have enough evidence to prove that he has violated campaign finance laws. On top of that, he's now involved in this hit-and-run accident. He had a female companion, and I'm not even going to even go there in terms of his personal decisions. But at the end of the day, I believe the legislature has a responsibility to hold him accountable. We hold other members of the legislature accountable. If you remember Senator Scott Bumgard, if you remember Representative Daniel Patterson, we've held our own members accountable. Well, there's a provision in the Constitution that allows us to hold our statewide elected officials accountable for anywhere from governor to the state mine inspector. If the House of Representatives decide that there is some wrongdoing, he did do something illegal, they can draft up what they call articles of impeachment, and then it comes over to the Senate, and the Senate would have a full hearing. It would be chaired by the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, and we would decide if whatever penalty, it can be as high as removal of office, it can be a censure, it can be perhaps maybe nothing. Maybe there's not much to it. But for us not to have this discussion is just sweeping it underneath the carpet, and I don't think we're doing our job when we're not holding...
And we're not talking about the traffic violation, we're talking about the campaign violation, right? What did you say earlier? $500,000 advantage through coordination with someone he should not have communicated with? Both.
Is this the same man that campaigned on that whole rule of law thing? I mean, am I getting that right?
Here's the state attorney general who pushed strongly for Senate Bill 1070 under the notion of the rule of law. We have the same attorney general that pushed the ban on ethnic studies in southern Arizona because of the rule of law. Attorney General Tom Horne should live by the same laws in which he's required to enforce. And when you do a hit and run, you go to jail.
That's right. If you do a hit and run, you go to jail. How come Tom Horne wasn't arrested and put in jail? How come? The same guy who got behind SB 1070, the same guy who got behind HB 2281 to practically sanitize, I'll say, Mexican-American studies here in Arizona. He's a career politician, and did you know, folks, he's from Canada originally? And here's one more thing, he's Jewish, and I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. As a Jewish person, I'm embarrassed that we've got a guy like this in Arizona government. Well, not to be outdone, also on this program, we took a look at Bill Montgomery, the county attorney, the current county attorney who basically decides how people will be charged or if they will be charged. He's sloppy. He got an award from Chicanos por la Causa last year, I guess maybe to make him appear amenable to the idea of immigration reform. Yet even at that time, he said, hey, I'm not going to lament and keep charging people as most as I can because I want to be tough on crime. For crying out loud, we can't have it both ways, and we really should get rid of guys like this. Phoenix Talkback has already reported on the case of Miguel Morales, who went free because the defense attorney was able to establish reasonable doubt that it could have been possible that someone at Morales' workplace might have been recruiting undocumented workers and providing them with false documents, and that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office had not investigated the possibility that Morales' documents were similarly falsified. Chalk up another example of a county attorney, Bill Montgomery's defeated attempt to deport yet another undocumented person. For crying out loud, when are groups like Chicanos por la Casa going to wake up? Not to give Bill Montgomery an award. And folks, the Real Arizona Coalition, a group of business people, they don't represent the majority of voters. They don't. But do you agree with me? You know, you're an average voter, Viva.
The things that Bill Montgomery's doing with CPLC, with other groups right now, could effectively lay down a new history for himself. Right. When it comes time for election time, that's all we remember. He's hanging out with CPLC or he's doing this and that, and then his history becomes different. And that happens to us as a state all the time.
So is that the benefit to him, that he somehow makes himself available to some of these groups, so therefore he can claim that he's bipartisan?
I think it's a very smart plan. We're not really a bunch of critical thinkers here in the state. We're going to skim over a resume that maybe goes back 6 months or so, and he's going to look like a damn hero of the community.
No. He's not a hero of the community. Bill Montgomery has, I believe, prosecutorial discretion and some leeway, but he has stuck close to charging the undocumented with a Class 4 felony for something that a regular citizen would normally be charged as a misdemeanor. So when he received this Champions for Children award by the CPLC, the Chicanos por la Casa, I guess it wasn't made clear whose children he would champion.
I find it offensive that a Chicano group like CPLC would actually support this kind of behavior?
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that. It's not like Bill Montgomery just woke up Tuesday morning and became a Nazi.
The only organization that has come out against Bill Montgomery due to the excess deportations, thank you, Bill, is the Hispanic Bar Association, Los Abogados. They're the only ones who come out against Bill Montgomery, and I applaud them, Los Abogados. The only organization. Other than that, the Real Arizona Coalition has come out in support of Bill Montgomery through their Sane Immigration Program, which is basically a watered-down version of the Gang of Eights program. Shame on all these people who've come out to support Bill Montgomery, because he still advocates prosecution to the maximum to deport the undocumented, even those undocumented who have applied for deferred action. Not to be outdone, and to show you that this program has been on the cutting edge all along, just this last week, Don Shooter, Arizona Senator Don Shooter, has been charged with 3 crimes after he went into that school and intimidated the people at the school because he wanted to get to his grandson's teacher. He felt as though his grandson's teacher was bullying his grandson. But he didn't make an appointment, and he just barged right in. And if teachers had been holding guns, they could have spread the message around the school, watch out, there's a shooter in the building. And the next thing you know, there's just bloodshed all over the place. But no one should use his position of power to try to intimidate anybody. And the first person who stood in line to come on this show to talk about Don Shooter was Terry Woodmansee, who ran in a primary to get on the ballot to challenge Don Shooter. And I wish she had won that primary, because she's a most worthy, notable opponent to call Don Shooter for what he is, someone who abuses his power. And he's also a racist. If you remember the time that the Arizona legislature wanted to renegotiate unemployment benefits, he arrived at the legislature wearing a sombrero and carrying a bottle of tequila. This guy represents his district. Well, now he's going to be charged with a crime, and he, too, should be arrested. A local Tea Party representative, Don Shooter, walked into a classroom to bully a teacher. On the phone with us, joining us, is Terry Woodmansee. Terry, are you there?
I'm here.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, Terry, this is Bobby. So what do you think of this whole shooter issue?
Well, I have a concern. If you remember back in 2011, Don Shooter did an incident in the legislature where he came in dressed as a sombrero with a bottle of tequila and basically made fun of a cultural diversity. And something I just recently learned that I really find amazing to me is that in 2012, SB 1462, which was to expand penalties for bullying, Don Shooter voted no on.
Voted against it?
Wow.
He voted against it. And he made a quote 10 days before he did this incident to the Latinos and Chicanos, and he said, "We all want a decent education for our kids. We all want a good paying job. We all want to live in peace and security." And 10 days later did this stunt with the teacher. The question I have now that I lead out there to law enforcement and to the school is, let's hold him accountable as much as we would anybody else. He made a move that he knew was wrong. He's not talking to people. He's going immediately through a lawyer. And to me, that says a lot about he knows what he did was wrong and criminal.
Yeah. Do you think that he should be prosecuted for this?
I do. I think criminal charges should be brought up just like anybody else would. Not only should he be charged criminally, but I think it's a must for the legislature to hold him accountable and sanction him or remove him based on the fact that he used his title and his power and his authority, and he made that a point during this event.
And Don Shooter is being charged by the prosecutor in Yuma. He is going to be charged. And, folks, I think a subtitle of this program pretty much has always been accountability. What have we seen? Steve Gallardo came on this program to call Tom Horn on account. We also call Bill Montgomery on account, and also Chicanos por la Causa, or any organization who supports this kind of behavior. It's all interconnected, folks. But there is one thing that this program will probably go down in history for, and that is, well, we are independent Democrats, we are progressive, but we were not too impressed with Citizens for Better Arizona and Randy Peraz and the recall against Joe Arpaio. It could possibly have been too soon, and that will be discussed before long. But it's clear after looking at Randy Peraz's tax returns and how inconsistent they are, is that Randy Peraz has been using these causes, these fears, these targets as a way to raise money. Yes, he successfully recalled Russell Pierce, but he should have stopped there. And he also should have included in the platform of his organization comprehensive immigration reform. Here's a combination clip of Phoenix Talkback on Horizonte, where I basically repeat, no one is above accountability or transparency, and we mean it here at Phoenix Talkback. We do. No one is above accountability and transparency. And I would call on Jose Cardenas from looking into some of these things that we mentioned on the show. Here it is.
Good evening. I'm Jose Cardenas. Phoenix Talkback has been called the world's first ever Jewish-Chicano Radio Show. The hour-long show airs on KFNX 1100 AM at 10 o'clock Sunday mornings. The show you just did this last Sunday, perhaps one of your more controversial ones, because it focused on Randy Peraz and questioning the monies he got in terms of the campaign, the recall campaign against Sheriff Arpaio, and pretty negative overall.
Well, when the recall ended, we still had Sheriff Joe. So the name of that series is Where's My Recall? All I'm saying is that no one is above accountability. No one is above transparency. No one is above accountability. No one is above transparency. No one is above accountability. No one is above transparency. No one is above accountability. No one is above transparency. No one is above accountability. No one is above transparency.
Why isn't Joe Arpaio recalled yet?
What is going on in our community that we can be taken on this ride, this prolonged, extended fantasy?
Randy Peraz, president of the Citizens for a Better Arizona, blamed the failed recall on the lack of donors, the lack of volunteers, the lack of buy-in by other elected officials, and the lack of courage to stand up to Sheriff Arpaio.
He's right. There wasn't buy-in. There wasn't help. So I'm not concerned about the officials, the elected officials, Sheriff Joe himself. I'm concerned about all the people who aren't moved at the fact that they're loading up Mexicans by the busload, stopping them at streetlights, putting them into prisons, and turning them into some kind of persecuted second-class citizenry. Randy's a professional. The people who ran this recall, they're all professionals. They know just as well as I do that there is no chance of recalling Sheriff Joe, and yet they took us through this again. According to the statements made on that day, it's not gonna stop. Didn't Lilia say that it doesn't stop here? We will continue. Continue what is the question?
Right.
Continue what? What have we accomplished so far?
I didn't know it was going to be more than recall Pierce. I didn't know it was going to morph into supporting a candidate for sheriff, but once he was done recalling Pierce, then he had another effort underway.
Maricopa County, Arizona has recall fever. I mean, when does it stop?
Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Blaming money for the loss of the recall is like blaming the Powerball machine for not kicking out your number. The win wasn't there. They knew it.
Lilia Alvarez announced that all of the petitions had been shredded, destroyed. And when asked how many signatures there were, her answer was, it's irrelevant.
I think they could have been working on a CIR. They could have been putting this energy towards the DREAM Act all this time. The DREAM Act would have essentially neutralized Sheriff Joe and his behavior. He claims that he's just doing what is the law. And if you change the law, then he will presumably adhere, right? But yet we just go after Sheriff Joe personally to no avail, and it's a waste of our time.
In 2011, Randy took 30% for himself. I bet you if that were any other nonprofit here in the state, people would be up in arms for someone taking 30% of the total cash contribution. People love going after the symptoms and not the cause of the illness. And they use that to filter all this money into their coffers. So they come up with creative titles like pollster and consultant, and they write themselves bigger checks than we're used to seeing for someone who traditionally does that job.
The question here is, where is my recall?
Yeah, where's the recall?
Where's the recall?
Yeah,
Didn't we get promised a recall twice? Where's the recall? Instead, what I got is a re-election, and I still have a Sheriff Joe.
The answer has always been comprehensive immigration reform.
Randy Perez has said the issue of immigration is not a litmus test for anybody to join CBA, and I think that's where he's making his tactical error.
The way to take the wind out of Arpaio's sails is to pass comprehensive immigration reform.
I think the community, people who gave and donated money time and time again, ought to know how many signatures there were, what percentage were valid, how close were they. For all we know, all they collected was 150,000, and a few people may have signed their names as Mickey Mouse. We will never know, and that is disingenuous. More importantly, he continued to ask for donations to the very last day. If he knew he was not going to succeed.
I'd like to know how much money has been received collectively by CBA and Respect Arizona since the inception of the recall.
Does Randy need Joe Arpaio to keep the money flowing? Is Joe Arpaio necessary in order for Randy to continue to ask for money?
Randy Perez really has no interest in getting rid of Joe Arpaio. That's not his thing. He's interested in power and money. That's what he's interested in.
He took 30% off of the top for a political consultant, and that doesn't include his personal expense account. And during the Pierce recall, we got expense accounts here for travel money to Washington. Why do you have to go to D.C. to recall Russell Pierce? And at this point, I don't have any proof in front of me that there was ever a legitimate recall effort put on here by anybody other than a bunch of hard-working, well-intentioned volunteers that, in my opinion, was exploited. And I'm angry as heck about it. I'm just going to keep speaking out against these ridiculous fake foul activists that we have out here that's using the community and impersonating activists and community organizers to make a living. I'm going to keep talking against that.
You want to know, where's our recall?
I call it a so-called recall, because at that point, that's all it is. A so-called recall.
So-called recall.
A so-called recall.
So-called recall.
We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop now. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going. We better stop.
So-called recall.
So-called
recall.
So-called
recall.
So-called
recall.
So-called
The following people were helpful to put Phoenix Talkback on the air: John, Bell, Shanae, Terry, Bobby, David, Mel, Rose, Margaret, Julius, Claude, Charles, Miriam, Paul, Angel, Viva, Victor, Cesar, Jose, Jeff, Jose, Juan, Santiago, Santana, Saul, Steve, Martine, Randy, Joe, Bill, Tom, Jan, Rudy, Del Fuego, Anita, Beer, Gail, Ringo, and me. Thanks, everybody.